Clean energy isn't just about megawatts and mandates, it's about people. And sometimes the most innovative projects are born from the intersection of policy, equity, and community vision. In Minneapolis, that vision is becoming reality. What started as a response to Minnesota's 2013 Solar Jobs Act has grown into a mission to build a green-collar economy, one that pairs climate solutions with career pathways for underserved communities. I'm John Engel, you're watching Critical Path, a show designed to unpack the untold stories of the grid. On this episode, I'm joined by Jamez Staples, founder and CEO of Renewable Energy Partners. Over the past decade, his team has gone from buying an abandoned roller skating rink on the North Side of Minneapolis to developing workforce training programs and large-scale clean energy projects. And now, in partnership with OATI, they're tackling something truly groundbreaking: the North Minneapolis Community Resiliency Hub. We'll take you inside this effort to deploy microgrids with a total of 1.4 megawatts of solar and 2 megawatts of battery storage across 4 public school buildings. Resources that can not only keep the lights on during outages, but also deliver unique revenue streams and social impact. Here's Jamez Staples. Jamez Staples, great to see you, and thanks so much for joining me on the show. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Happy to be here. Thank you, John.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to get to here. And a couple of different lanes. One is exclusively Renewable Energy Partners, I think, has an incredible story over the last decade plus of, your origin story, the impact that you've been able to have in communities, and kind of that ongoing mission statement. So we'll get to that. And then where OATI comes in and the resilience project that we're working on in Minneapolis, and some of the tangible details around how that project is coming together and the uniqueness of kind of urban multi microgrid setup. But before diving into all the project stuff, I want to spend some time on REP and you, Jamez. I think
Sure.
that story is worth spending the bulk of this conversation on. So why don't you start off by sharing a little bit about your entrance into this space? So back before Renewable Energy Partners, what was that initial nudge into this crazy world?
Well, the energy space is something that's always been interesting to me, but not necessarily know how to get involved and engage with it. And so the primer for me getting into this space was the issue of the racial disparities, acknowledging that Minnesota has some of the worst racial disparities in the country when you aggregate them in terms of income, education, home ownership, you name it. And when you aggregate that, it becomes a big issue. And so when I ended up, I was living in the Virgin Islands at the time, and when I was there, I didn't know how to get into solar energy beforehand, because Van Jones had coined the term of addressing climate change and poverty as a big deal. And I was like, wow, that's something really cool, but I wanted in on it somehow, but didn't know how. And so when I moved back from the islands, and Governor Dayton at the time, I want to say this was 2012, 2013, mandated that 1.5% of the state's energy come from solar power, I looked at that as a market signal and as a way to help address the issues in my community while also creating jobs for myself and other people in the neighborhood. So that's kind of how I got into this space.
You're now the second person I've interviewed for this show that has brought up Van Jones's statement about energy
Okay.
and equity, which is an interesting theme that's developing very early on in this show's existence.
Yeah.
But on that point, there are so many different ways to look at racial disparity and income inequality and public health, a bunch of different ways. Energy is one that I think we all seem to arrive at this industry with little to no previous experience, and it's super complicated. It's a tough one to grasp, and when you go from not just project development to execution, there's so much that goes into it. So why specifically energy? Like what separated that opportunity from maybe some others in addressing sort of your primary goal?
Well, the electrical industry for me, I looked at it when you tie those two together, climate change and poverty, right? And so I'm just going to be really frank here. When the people of the predominant culture have a concern or an issue, right, and it's a dire issue, if the people who are of the lower income stratosphere can help be the solution of that, it fixes both problems at the same time.
Mm.
right? And so for me, I looked at this, I call it the sky is falling kind of thought process, right? Where, oh, we got to do something, but we don't know how to do. And the people on the other end say, hey, look, if I can actually support myself in this process, I will help fix your problem. That is a big opportunity, right? And this is not just, and when I say a big opportunity, it's a global phenomenon. And so the idea that we are fixing, it's a sense of dignity and respect and self-worth that's established through the process of one, getting skilled, getting trained, and ultimately going to work in the industry, right? But then to know that you are ultimately powering your neighbor's home, right, and supporting your own livelihood in a clean mechanism, it's huge.
You just gave us a perfect transition. You said getting skilled and trained, and I
Yeah.
know that this isn't just about developing solar and storage and microgrid projects for you guys. It's all rooted in this really clear impact statement. So I think before getting into all of the stuff you guys are doing on the workforce development front and the community impact front, how about you set the stage a little bit for what Renewable Energy Partners is doing today? What's your core focus?
Well, Renewable Energy Partners is a solar development firm. And aside from developing solar projects, we are vertically integrating that process, by becoming electrical contractor, which we also now install projects. We have a project going up not far from a headquarters here at 1200 Plymouth to right up on Penn and Plymouth, which is a health clinic in the neighborhood, which we're installing. I want to say maybe 250 kilowatts of solar on the rooftop of that building, right? So we're not just kind of like, talking about it. We're actually doing it. We're developing projects, we're installing projects, and we're seeding the neighborhood in which we see to have more people actually starting to understand what the solar energy industry layout looks like. What we're also doing is we're developing entry points to the solar energy industry by way of subscribers as community solar developers. So we're developing community solar projects for low income communities, making sure that there's access points. That's happening one block from here on the rooftop of North High School and other sites within the community that we've developed in projects. And so that's a low income community solar garden, which there's no upfront cost. There's no credit requirement. It's a pay as you go program. So just like you pay your Excel bill, you pay your community solar garden subscription, and you're getting a discounted rate on your utility bill. And as a result of that, the employment opportunities are happening also. We're developing microgrids in this neighborhood, right, in partnership with OATI, right? So across the street from us, headquarters, we've got on the maintenance facility right here on Penn and Fremont, we're putting solar on the rooftop of that and a battery storage system. We're putting solar on the rooftop of the Franklin Middle School, Hall Elementary, and the Nutrition Center. And so I'm going to point out the Nutrition Center specifically because that's a huge project for us because in 2012, yeah, it was 13 years ago, but it's still fresh in the back of my mind. When we had a tornado hit this neighborhood, nobody knew what to do when the power went out. And so their refrigerators were down. Those that had electric stoves, their stoves didn't work. The freezers were obviously not staying for keeping things frozen. And so what this facility does is it's actually it's base operations where people can get some of their program, some of their well they actually produce all the breakfasts and lunches at that building. So that's base camp if people need food. That will operate in perpetuity 24/7 because of the way that that system is set up. So we're supporting neighborhood, we're developing workforce, we're developing projects, we're developing people, we're developing community.
Yeah, and I'm glad you got right into the project too, because it is unique just as a project in our industry and how big it is and its significance. It's multi-site, there's orchestration, there's all these different things at play. But then when you think about how these projects come together, no microgrid is the same. They're all snowflakes, and how you get that idea to commercial operation is also going to be different every single time. So I can't wait to pick your brain there because I know there was some gymnastics at play when it came to setting up all of the different stakeholders and how do you
Yeah,
compensate and how do you pay for this and risk, all that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
at the high level, we're talking about 1,450 kilowatts of solar, 2,000 kilowatts of storage across 4 public school buildings in Minneapolis.
yeah.
You mentioned OATI's role in this. Our microgrid controller, GridMind, is involved. Walk me through this project, maybe from the early days to where we are now?
Wow.
How did it, how, I know there's a lot of steps, so maybe we don't have time for
Yeah.
all of it, but I
Yeah.
think that stakeholder engagement piece is what fascinates me most about this project. How you get the buy-in from very different groups with very different goals.
Yeah. So this project predates, I mean, this project, it's like 2018, right? So it goes back to just a application that was submitted in partnership with the University of Minnesota Energy Transition Lab, Ellen Anderson, who was there leading it. And she asked us if we wanted to apply for this program with Rocky Mountain Institute. I said, sure. And then we were selected, and that which was kind of shocking because it was kind of one of those far long shots. It's thousands of applications that get submitted, and we were selected, so we were excited. We spent 4 days or 3 days at in Utah at a resort, Robert Redford's resort, kind of modeling this project. And I'm going to cut kind of short because it can go long, right? But the long story short is when we first had a conversation with OATI, it was just kind of like a challenge. It was over. It was just like barrier after barrier, and then it was like, all right, well, we're just gonna put this on the shelf. And then we put it on the shelf. Siemens came at us, and Siemens was interested in working with us. And then there was some challenges there. We were like, we'll just put it back on the shelf. And then Excel put out an RFP because I serve on the EVAC, the Energy Vision Advisory Committee, and they issued an RFP for 3 sites for kind of this non-wires alternative program that they wanted to deploy, and we were actually selected. And so through that process, we were selected, and there was funding that was supposed to be allocated by way of Excel. They were supposed to build these projects and kind of own them. And then there was a gap, and then there was a gap, and there was a gap. We didn't know what to do about the gap. Sometimes it happens, right? And
Hmm.
then before you knew it, there was funding from the Department of Energy that became available by way of some grant that Excel Energy had been awarded by way of the a GRIP grant from DOE. So that's kind of how the project came to fruition. But the big deal is that it's in a low income community, and these types of projects are best, if you ask me, for those communities, right? These communities where I live and where we're building this project will ultimately help people that can't pack up and go when the power's out, right? It's interesting because I just watched it was a terrible situation in terms of Katrina, which was what 20 years ago, right? And how people could not get out because they just couldn't. The order of evacuation was there, but no one could leave because they didn't have the resources. Obviously, we're not going to deal with a hurricane here, but ideally, if we know that something's going to happen and we know that we've at least got power, we're at least okay in that regard, right? Because what are we without power, right? We're back to the Stone Ages.
Yeah. Well, no, and I feel you. I mean, even the statement of we're not going to get a hurricane here, it more true for you, but where I'm at in Asheville, North Carolina, we used to say that too. And then we got creamed by a storm.
Wow,
Let me look at the date. In 1 week, it'll be a year.
wow,
One of the craziest experiences I've obviously ever been through, and seeing the community impact of that, you start to think about resilience in a different way. And I
absolutely,
think we all recognize that reliability and resilience are important and we want it, but they're really difficult to um, put a value on or put a
yeah,
cost on. And
yes,
I know you know that acutely in trying to pencil out these projects. So how did
yes.
how did you get there? I mean, you've got a bunch of different funding streams and different programs, and you started the project, paused the project, back on with the project. How nimble did you have to be around, like what's the story that we're telling here on the value of resilience, and how did that ultimately play a role in getting this project to where it is?
Well, I believe that the resilience piece is extremely important, right? I mean, we've watched what has happened over this last, I don't know, 5, 7 years in terms of our temperatures, and this most recently, as just we're just experiencing almost a 90-degree yesterday, right, in Minneapolis in September, right? I mean, those are June and July temps, right? Sometimes, very seldom. And so resiliency, what we sought to do as a service community. And so the funding tools were obviously positioned by way of Xcel Energy initially, but then we had, by way of this grant that we were awarded through Department of Energy, we had to do a match, right? So it's a $4.8 million award that was given to Xcel. We are a sub awardee, And now we have to match that. Well, how do we match that as like a small business that's doing really impactful community work, right? We just don't have $4.8 million in the bank to go and say, we're going to do this, right? We had to think about the tools that were out there to be used, and that was one of them was the tax credits for the solar project, right? And so that's how we actually utilized. That's a good portion of our match right there. We ended up utilizing the Minnesota Clean Energy Finance Innovation Authority, which has funding that which is the new green bank for the most part in Minnesota, and we were the second awardee of grant funds from that bank to help support this project. And so we have to go through different processes to get reimbursed by way of the grant, but that's how we're funding this project. And so um, ultimately, the end game is that we will sell power to the district that will support the district and save them money too. So it's not like we're just going to sell you power at the same price. We're selling it to them at a steep discount so that the school district can do exactly what they're employed to do, and that is to educate children, which is ultimately going to help address the issue of racial disparities.
Yeah, I mean, the mission is clear, but you also have to have the business case with all these projects. It can't just be, we know we're doing good.
Right.
Unfortunately, because of just
Yeah.
how this stuff gets paid for and
Yeah.
how we distribute capital.
Yeah.
Um, a piece of this conversation I was really looking forward to is that, with these capitally intensive infrastructure projects, they often take 3, 4, 5 years to come to fruition. And we have conversations when we're excited about projects being announced, but then,
Yeah.
they go in the background, you don't see them, you forget about them,
Yeah.
you move on to the next one. You
Yeah.
guys have been around long enough now to see the cycle play out, to develop a
Yeah.
project, to deploy a project, to drive past it down the street, and to then see how it's received in the community and the impact in the community. What that piece? What have you seen from the impact of your projects beyond, the obvious decarbonization and resiliency benefits? How do you see that change really the change or elevate the fabric of the communities you work in?
Well, I'll say this, right? Community outreach is essential. I think it's important that you engage community at a high level, but then also to a granular level so they even understand what some of the threats, opportunities, and strengths and weaknesses are of the grid, right? And so helping people understand that can help them to mobilize and actually start to push to get funding for these from their cities, be it legislators or however it is that they actually go after these resources. Um, the revenue models are can be challenging, as we know, right? I mean, you got to find different ways to cover the costs. But as you know, the energy costs are continuously increasing, right? So if we don't start to figure this out right now, it's going to cost us more later. And so ideally, what we should be doing is we should be making sure that the more people, not just in urban communities, but in rural communities and communities all over in every state, are starting to galvanize around this issue of resiliency because you never know, and you can't necessarily put a dollar value on it, but when it's needed, it's priceless. So
Yeah, and resilience is the new decarbonization, and we're going at the same challenges here, whether we label it as fighting climate change or improving resilience. I mean,
yeah.
they're both in lockstep. What from this community resilience project have you learned that you're aiming to replicate or think would benefit others that are in this space? I know they're all unique, especially microgrid projects, but I think it's such a fun one to talk about because
Yeah.
of that impact that you laid out, and it's schools, it's the surrounding community, it's so multifaceted. What do you take away from this one?
Um, Again, I mean, community outreach is essential, right?
Hmm.
Coordination amongst team members are going to that's a big deal, right? Making sure that because you don't know what you don't know when you're developing these projects. And so making sure that you have proper representation and making sure that everybody's on the same page and playing on the same wavelength around what the intended plan is, but also what the unintended plans are when things don't necessarily go the way that you expect
How
them
many of
to
those were there?
go. Plenty, as you can
We'll stop
imagine.
there. We got to stop recording before you keep laying them out.
um, and project sites, right? I mean, you need experienced entities that are kind of willing and more than willing to host these assets because security is an issue, right? But also like the idea that usually unknown people will be coming into the space that you're setting up for this, right? And so how do you make sure that the people who you're working with who initially think, yeah, great, we'll have power during the outage, but then we'll have to welcome some people who we traditionally wouldn't normally welcome in to get cooling, right? To plug in phones, to plug in, to store things, right? And some of those things. I mean, and the payback, right? I mean, like the
Hmm.
cost of these things, they're expensive, but at the same time, like we said, it's very much so worth it when you kind of put because you can't put a value on the idea. Think about it, like how many people died in some of these situations where people were overheating, right? What is the value on somebody's life or the value of someone having a traumatic experience because they just didn't have something as simple as power, right?
Yeah.
It's a different situation.
Yeah, I mean, it should be a human right. I think we've
Yeah,
all seen that globally, the data is obvious that access to electricity improves, economic outcomes, it improves public health outcomes, all of that.
yeah,
So,
uh,
there's no debate there. And when you talk about the payback too, this is another, kudos to this project is you're right. You can't put a price tag or a cost on someone's life,
yeah,
but you can put it on food waste, and food waste is expensive. So you put microgrid and resilience around a nutritional site. There is some value there. There you do unlock that additional value. So I think that's just another example of being really creative here, and a fun story of also local partners. I mean, you guys are in Minneapolis. Our headquarters is in Minneapolis as well. So having that partner engagement is really cool.
we did start going down this route of this food waste issue with some of our local partners, and after 4 hours of no refrigeration, they're required to throw out whatever was in that freezer, refrigerator, and whatnot. And so you think about like the idea of being able to help deliver a resource that can save millions on millions of dollars, but
Yeah.
also that the fact that these systems support that it's just impossible. It's amazing.
Yeah, so it's getting beyond the mission statement and the community impact in a way and getting down to where can we find the dollars? What can you not stand to lose or what is so expensive if you do lose it? So just great job by you guys and enjoy continuing to collaborate on whatever you guys have next. Just pick up the phone. But Jamez Staples, good luck to you and Renewable Energy Partners. Thanks for chatting with me.